Welcome to Robert's Record Corner. I'm Robert, and I am a bit of an obsessive fan. When I get into something like the Stones or Dylan or Beach Boys, I have to have everything, except for Kokomo. And it turns out my dad was the same way for someone else. I remember growing up, being in the back seat of the Toyota Tercel, driving around Tulsa, and a song would come on the radio, and he would look up into the rearview mirror and say, "Robert, name the singer." I'd kind of shrug and look out the window. "Kenny Rogers?" And he'd say, "Frank Sinatra."
If I knew then what I know now.
And it was always Frank Sinatra. My dad was obsessed with Frank Sinatra. My dad had dozens of records that I had always thought had been ruined in the 1985 flood that had gone a foot deep through our house. But I was in Tulsa recently and I had an amazing discovery. The records survived. They were in an upstairs attic. And I brought back a few famous Frank Sinatra records to add to my small collection. There's Happy Frank, Live Frank, Sad Frank, Creepy Frank, even Clown Frank. And I was energized by this that I immediately went out to used record stores in Portland to look for more Frank Sinatra records, and I found something I had never known existed. It was a cover that didn't even look like a Frank Sinatra album. And it turns out that it was Watertown from 1970, his least successful studio album ever. You can't even get it on iTunes. It has 10 sad songs with fuzz guitars and big basses, a little Pet Soundsy. He recorded this in 1969. Woodstock's going on. He's still trying to figure out how does Frank Sinatra stay relevant in the age of Beatlemania. So he turns to a guy that wrote songs for Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons, and Jake Holmes, who wrote Dazed and Confused for Led Zeppelin. It was a failure.
Just one mistake is not enough to change my mind.
But its impact has only grown since then. Nina Simone covered one of the songs in the 1980s. Paris Review wrote that no other album they had heard qualified for literature more than Watertown. And there's a fan site devoted to it called Watertownology. But when I listened to it, I honestly was speechless for a couple days. It really stuck out of all the Frank Sinatra albums I've heard. There's nothing else like it. And it reminded me of another album I've heard, a concept album of a broody guy lamenting a lover that had left him. Berlin by Lou Reed, which was recorded 3 years later. Both albums have earthy tone covers and memorabilia of their significant other that had left them. Caroline Says 2 starts with this little plucking guitar part. Which is exactly the same as Michael and Peter from Frank Sinatra's album 3 years before.
Michael is you.
Both have songs about their kids. Lou's is called The Kids. Did Lou knowingly borrow from Frank Sinatra's Watertown? My dad died in 2002, and I have often seen football, college football, as a way to communicate with him. That I watched the Oklahoma Sooners play, and I have imaginary conversations that I would relay to my dad about, hey, Baker Mayfield won the Heisman. Hey, they lost another national championship. But now, my ongoing conversation with him has turned back to its roots, Frank Sinatra.
So many changes since you've been away.
This episode was not sponsored by Funny Mushrooms, which were made in Lithuania, but I like them.